Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ashley. Today we'll be discussing all the books I read in 2021. So this video is inspired by Jack Edwards. He did a summary of all the books that he read in a year, and he did it in one sentence or less-ish. And I loved that idea, so I'm going to do that for the books that I read in this year. So I have my notes here, and in order to make this actually a one sentence-ish or less summary of each of the books, we're going to have to stick to the notes pretty heavily. So here you go. Okay, book number 1. I actually don't know what the name of this book is. 50 Marathons in 50 Days by Dean Karnazes. By that guy. This book is super interesting. I learned a lot about running a marathon. The author he's got a lot of rights to brag about running 50 marathons in 50 days. And I have a right to not want to read about that. Book number 2. Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I loved the way mental health was talked about here, but not the way it was treated at the end. Wrapped it up too prettily. The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson, a novella. This was delightful. It's a story about forgery. I'm a sucker for forgery. I loved it. Book number 4. We're going to very quickly forget what number we're on, so I'm going to stop doing numbers. The next book is The Betrothed by Kira Cass. I don't know what this book was. It was hugely disappointing. The beginning of the novel didn't match the end. I'm not reading the sequel. Next book, Twelfth Night by Shakespeare. Malvolio, you poor fool. I think about you all the time. I highly recommend this book. Still thinking about it a year later. Next, we have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Sometimes I think about this book and think that maybe I should have given it a higher star rating, and then I remember it was half-baked, so I don't. Next, we have The Talent War by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. I read this for work. I use it for work. I liked it so-so. Next, we have Wildfire by Nelson DeMille. This was good, but it was deeply unfair in its stereotypes. You couldn't publish it now. But the writing is good. The content, not so much. American Royals by Catherine McGee. I loved this book. I think it was my first 5 stars of the year. I need to read the sequel. I need to. Okay, next book. Black Man in a White Coat by Damian Tweedy. I am still thinking about this novel, almost a year later. And the effects that race has on medicine and your standard of care. And I look at this whenever I read news articles, and it's in the back of my brain all the time. It was very world-altering. Next book is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Yes, I get that confused. Snakes and Songbirds by Suzanne Collins. This is the prequel to The Hunger Games. I wasn't super impressed by it when I read it the first time, but I've since watched the movies and reread the books, and my rating of it increased and went higher. Next we have Where the Crawdad Sings by Delilah Owens. I think Island of the Blue Dolphins combined with To Kill a Mockingbird covers a lot of good themes, but it doesn't cover them the best. It doesn't cover them as well as other novels do. The Cousins by Karenina McManus. Honestly, I was a little let down by this book. None of her books, in my mind, have been as good as One of Us is Lying, but I keep reading them because I keep wanting that same thrill as reading that first book for the first time. But it was still a good novel, just not as satisfying as it could have been. Next we have The Lion's Game by Nelson DeMille. This was good. Again, stereotypes. But it's really well written, really suspenseful, but I don't keep suspense novels, so I don't own this book anymore. The next is We Are Not Free by Tracy Chee, and oh my heart, this book shattered me into a million pieces. Everyone needs to read this novel. Taught me so much about the Japanese internment camps and life and being a human being. Persuasion by Jane Austen. I read this twice this year. I gave it 3.5 stars. Not my favorite Jane Austen novel, but it is very sweet. Next we have The Chemist by Stephanie Myers. This is her best novel, in my opinion. She should write more stuff like this. I would read a ton of her stuff if it was written more like this. This is her most believable romance, in my opinion. Next we have Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. I read this too fast. I need to reread it because I missed so many beautiful details. But I loved the female characterization that Brandon Sanderson does. He writes female characters so well. Next we have The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I loved this. I listened to it in 48 hours, and I laughed hysterically the entire time. I'm surprised I haven't read more of her works because of how much I loved this, so future editing self, note to you, put this on the list for next year. Next we have The Lost Symbol by Dan Brown. I don't remember much about this book, other than I thought it was stupid, and I forgot as much of it as possible almost as soon as I finished reading it. Next, we have Believe It by Jamie Kern Lima. This was a stereotypical self-help guru poetry, magnetic poetry book, as Books with Savvy would say. Business magnet guru, oh, I can't even remember. Gosh dang it. Business guru magnetic poetry. There we go. It's filled with a lot of pretty words, but no actual help. The Poppy Wars by R.F. Kuang. My heart. This book, because of how well written this book gutted me and destroyed me, and I need to read this, but I have to be in the right frame of mind because of how much I know the next books are going to impact me and destroy me. So I haven't picked them up yet. But I need to finish this series because I need to know what happens to Rin. Next we have The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This was adorable. This is the perfect children's novel. Magic, friendship, characters who have character flaws but they're still lovable. I loved it. I will read this again with my daughter. Next we have More Than a Body by Lexi and Lindsay Kite, who are both PhDs. This is a book about the huge marketing behind making women feel terrible about their bodies and what you can do about it. This is a self-help book that actually gives physical tips of advice on how to do things and how to change the environment that you're in, and I loved it. 5 stars. Next we have A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I love this. It was well written, it was well articulated, it was a fresh spin on the tired trope of boarding schools. It did have a racist line when it was published that has since been redacted and apologized for, which I think it was handled appropriately, I think. I haven't followed up with the sequel in this. Again, editing, Ashley. See, this is good because next year, because I'm building out my TBR for next year, now looking back on this, I'm going to be like, oh, I still haven't followed up with that novel yet? Shame on me. So I mean, editing self again. Second book. Go forth. Go do. Midnight Sun by Stephanie Myers. I have a soft spot for this book. I liked it better than any of the other Twilight books because it was written better than any of the other Twilight books, and I would read it again. I've thought about this book a lot since reading it, and it is probably, well, aside from New Moon, because it doesn't contain anything from Edward's perspective, as opposed to the book that only contains Edward's perspective. I feel hypocritical. We're going to move on. The Groom Grotto by Lemony Snicket. This book makes me never want to eat mushrooms again. If you know, you know. A Promised Land by Barack Obama. I loved this. I thought it was super well written, but the Obamas are both very well written and well educated. I loved this. I want to read the sequel, and I want to read it again. I would listen to it again because his voice is very soothing. I appreciated that. Next we have Sense and Sensibility, another Jane Austen novel. This is my favorite Jane Austen novel. 5 out of 5 stars. Next we have Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff. This was a book about Trump, all the scandals, the biases. It was written well, but there's not enough here that is fact-based to make it a lasting political novel. It was very sensationalized. It was made to emphasize the gossip and the scandal going on at the time. So it was an interesting read, but I don't think it was very factual or fair. Next we have Twilight by Stephanie Myers, because I finished Midnight Sun and went, I want to read the Twilight saga again. And I read Twilight and I went, what is this? Also, because I was in a vampire kick again, the next book is Blood Promise by Rochelle Mead. This is the 4th book in the Vampire Academy series. 4th book is my least favorite, which is why I stopped at that book. But I read it and I enjoyed it. Is it the next great piece of classical literature? It is not, but I still enjoyed it. Next we have Fear by Bob Woodward. Trump in the White House, I think so it's Fear, Trump in the White House by Bob Woodward. This is very factually written. I feel like I do love everything Bob Woodward writes because I love his journalistic style. I really enjoyed this novel. I think it was a really good summary. I learned a lot of things. He's sympathetic to Trump in some things and harsh on Trump on other things, which I think is probably a more fair and realistic and less politicized view of things, which almost rounds out my reading of Trump because now I still need to find a biography of Trump that is sympathetic towards him, probably written by a Republican, and then I feel like we'll have had a fair view of everything that went on during that time, like it was so long ago. Next we have The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. So atmospheric. I loved this. It was a slow read, and I didn't mind that. Next we have New Moon by Stephanie Myers. I loved this novel. I thought it was a great overview of mental health issues, and also Edward's not in it, so it's great. and Jacob's a good friend in it, and out of the Twilight Saga, it's the best one. The Penultimate Peril by Lemony Snicket, which is book number 12 in the series of Unfortunate Events. And shout out to this novel for dealing with real problems that you face growing up, and like your fear that you yourself might be becoming a bad person. Like, handled with grace and finesse and humor. Great. The next book is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, Leaf Babin. Read this for work. I liked it. It was my favorite out of the 3 books that I read from them this year. Okay, I'm going to butcher this next one. The Shadow King by Maza Mangitsi. I'm sorry, I totally butchered that last name. This is exactly what I want a historical fiction to look like. This is one of the few historical fictions that I have read and really appreciated and liked. This is about women warriors in Africa at the start of World War II, and it is fabulously written. It is powerful. It covers a lot of hard to deal with issues, such as rape, so trigger warnings for that. But it was very well written, very well researched. It was beautiful. The next is Spiritbound, the 5th book in the Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. Can you tell I wasn't getting enough of the vampires? 5th book was okay. I don't mind this one. The 5th and the 6th book. The 4th, 5th, and 6th books, I'm just like, meh, they're good. I got tired of the romance, but they were formative, and I enjoyed them. The next is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Meh. That's how I felt about this book. It's a self-help book, but in fiction form. And depression doesn't actually work the way he described it in the novel, but it would be really nice if it did, which is why we call it a work of fiction. Next is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. This book is overrated. Moving on. Eclipse by Stephanie Myers. This book is also overrated, and I despised this novel because of the relationship aspect. Next we have A Man Called Uba by Frederick Bachman. I read this book twice because I loved it so much. Trigger warnings for suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. But this is one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. Next is The End by Lemony Snicket. It was so satisfying to finish the series. I finished it once as a kid, and now I finished it as an adult, and it still holds up. I still love it. We have The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. I really enjoyed this novel. It was a slow go, but I really enjoyed it, and I will have a video reviewing it coming out later. Shameless plug. Next we have The Last Sacrifice by Rochelle Mead, the last of the Vampire Academy novels. It made me happy. Next we have The Selection by Kira Cass. I went through a romance phase in the middle of the year, you know? I really did. Next we have Chasing Slow by Erin Lochner. This is the second time I've read this book. I love it. It's a memoir. It makes me so happy. Next we have The Elite by Kira Cass. Didn't love this one. This is when I decided that The Selection was mostly drama for drama's sake, which I didn't realize the first time reading it. And then the next book after that is The One, also by Kira Cass, the finishing of the Selection series. It was okay. I liked it better than the middle one. But I don't know that I'll be reading The Selection again for a while, because I thought it was pointless. And sometimes I'm in the mood for pointless, but this wasn't the pointless that I was looking for. Next we have The Siren by Kira Cass. I went through a real Kira Cass phase here. This book is weird. It is an unfulfilling romance, and it had a lot of really good points, and when the romance was actually there, it was very satisfying and very sweet, and then the romance kind of just vanishes, which I found really disappointing and annoying. Lost potential. Next we have The Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate. This book had a really interesting concept, but it is historical fiction that jumps back and forth between the past and the future, and I really hate historical fiction, and I really hate historical fiction that jumps back and forth. This book was wasted on me. Yeah, next we have The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner by Stephanie Myers. So I've officially read everything that Stephanie Myers has written, and I don't know why this was written. It didn't add anything or change anything in the Twilight story, and all the characters die. It was brief, and that was the best part about it. Next we have The Mail Order Mishaps. I almost said Misfits. Mail Order Mishaps. This is a series of short novellas all about mail order brides, and I loved this. These were poorly written, and I just needed a romance fix, and this did it for me. Next we have My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinka Braithwaite. This, 5 stars. One of the best books I read all year. Greatest twist endings I've ever read. I absolutely adored this. Next we have The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink and Leaf Babin. Again, 3rd book by them. I read it for work. I use it for work. It was pretty good. Plum Island by Nelson DeMille. This is the first book in the John Corey detective series. This book was pretty boring. I give this a 2. This is a detective thriller novel that was extremely sexist and didn't get interesting until about 700 pages in. I thought about stopping this multiple times, but it's referenced so much in the later novels that I decided to just plow through and push through, but I haven't picked up anything else by him since because I was so annoyed by that book. Which is interesting because I've loved the writing in every one of his other books, so this book just... Next, we have The Little Book of Hygge by Mike Wiking. Wiking. We're going to go with Wiking. This second time I've read this, I loved it the first time around, and I loved it a little less the second time around, because some of the things that he said, I was like, that's not scientifically backed. And I get where you're trying to go here with this, but what you just said is not scientifically backed, and I don't appreciate that. Next, we have The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I love this series. I love this book. I loved it. Every time I read this book, I love it even more. And then quickly followed by that is Blue Lily, Lily Blue. I read the third one before the second one because the audiobook came in. The third audiobook came in first. And I liked this book a lot better. This whole series, I liked it a lot more the third time around. I liked it a lot more the third time around. Then we have The Dream Thieves, the second book. This one grew on me this time around. I appreciated it. We also have Happily Ever After by Kira Cass, rounding out almost all of the books that, I almost read all of the books that Kira Cass has published this year. I just didn't finish the selection series because I thought the books following her daughter, I didn't enjoy those, so I wasn't going to pick those up again. These short stories were actually really well written because it focused on characters other than America, and I liked that a lot. I was really fascinated by the other characters. Next we have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. My husband read this, totally loved it, and pestered me until I read it, and then I fell in love with it, and I was like, oh, this is great. I loved The Martian, the movie. Still haven't read the book yet. Okay, that's also should be on my list for next year. This is good. This is good that we do this. And then we moved into the Jenny Han. I reread a lot of her stuff too. So we have Burn for Burn, Fire with Fire, and Ashes to Ashes. This story I love. I listen to it at least once a year because I love the voice. I love the narration. I don't know that I've ever actually physically read this book, but even if I did, I would probably read it in the narration. I love this story. I did get a little bit tired of it by the time I got to the third book, probably because the pacing felt slower to me than it ever has, but I've listened to the series 5 or 6 times, and I think I was just ready to be done with the series. But overall, highly recommend. Next we have Crooked House by Agatha Christie. This is my first Agatha Christie novel. I did not guess the correct ending. I had the wrong suspect the entire time. Totally enjoyed this. I will totally read more for things next year. Next we have Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Oh, this novel. It tore me up and put me back together and then tore me to pieces again. I love Leo Tolstoy. I love his writing. I love the way Tolstoy writes about women. It's a great strength of his. Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. My guess is that this is considered a classic only because it has Charles Dickens' name on it. Because I didn't find anything here that I found compelling or interesting long term. Other than that it's a progenitor of A Christmas Carol. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is one of the best books I read all year. I adore Frankenstein's monster and his experience gaining and then losing his humanity. Tale as old as time, timeless classic. We'll read many, many times in the future, and I'm very excited about that. The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton Lee Stewart. I loved this novel as a kid, and it didn't hold up for me as an adult, which is a bit of a shame. It kind of felt like a knockoff of A Series of Unfortunate Events, but not as well written. Next we have The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman. This is the second book in the Golden Compass series. It started out really slow, and then I really loved it. I ended up really enjoying listening to this novel and then reading it on the side when I had a spare moment. It surprised me how much I liked this book. The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks. Do not read this book. It is flat, it is boring, it is lifeless. I don't know how his writing career took off with this book. Ooh, we're coming to the end. Okay, so the last couple. We have A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Society has conditioned me to love this novel, and I do. 5 out of 5 stars. Next, we have Catching Fire. I finally finished the Hunger Games series. So Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. I wish I had read The Hunger Games earlier, because when I finished this, I was like, where are all the people that love this novel and want to talk about this novel with me? So I quickly then read Mockingjay. I love the series. I love how it talks about trauma. I love that the characters deal with their trauma realistically. The movies are great. The books are better, but the movies are still really good. One of my favorite series and movie series. Oh, satisfying. And then we have The Raven King to finish off the Raven Cycle series. The ending of this Raven Cycle, I didn't love it the first time or the second time around. I did like it surprisingly more this time around. It felt more cohesive this time around because I was more aware of the details. All right, and finally, we have Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. And that's all the books I read in the month of 2021, the year 2021. Now, just in terms of data, the shortest book I read was A Christmas Carol. The longest book I read was Rhythm of War with 1,232 pages, so like, go me. And the average book length was 394 pages. But the most popular book I read was The Hunger Games, and the least popular was Melody Mishaps. So, and then my average rating was 3.6. Anyway, that sums up 2021. In my year of books. Doesn't sum up 2021 because there's a lot more to it than that. But that is the end of this video. I'll talk with you all in the comments down below and in another video. Bye!